What's up, guys? This is Joe Bennett, Josh Vogel with Redcon1, and we are discussing some different variations for deadlift and where they may or may not have application. There's a lot of questions about what is the difference between conventional and a sumo deadlift. So first, you have to ask yourself, what is the reason that you're doing deadlifts? So if you're looking for a lot of overall body development, so if you're really looking for a pretty balanced exercise for glutes, for hams, for quads, conventional deadlifts are great for that. If you're looking at something that's going to have a little bit more emphasis on that adduction motion and the muscles that are involved, a little bit less on glutes, a little bit less on the hamstrings and the knee extensors, the quads, sumo deadlift is going to be a little bit better of a fit. So if we watch Josh go first with a conventional deadlift, we'll see if we look, he stops right there for a second. We just look at the joints involved. Again, he's got a decent amount of knee flexion, so he's got just short of 90 degrees going on the knee. That's why your quads are essentially going to do a lot of work. He's in a very hip flex position, so he's going to be doing a lot of glutes, a lot of hams, and if he just stands up from there, that's kind of what I mean, where it's somewhere, if you look at that position and you just compare it to a squat, it's kind of like almost like a high or very hip dominant squat. That's why generally people can deadlift a little bit more weight than they can squat. So if he goes into a sumo stance, again, if we look at those same joints involved as he drops down into that position, you can see his knees aren't bent quite as much. He's not quite in his hip flex position, and he's a little bit more of an opened up position there. So obviously he has a lot more range of motion occurring. He's in a lot more of a abducted position with his hips. And again, he's got a little bit less of pure knee extension, a little bit less of pure hip extension. So again, it comes to one of those things from a hypertrophy standpoint, from an aesthetic standpoint, just kind of know what muscles you're training and adjust accordingly. If your goal is more of a powerlifting standpoint, there's a couple more factors that go into it. And the best advice I can give is, if you're really trying to just move as much weight as possible, you might want to spend a little bit time of doing both, and you're just going to find out pretty quick which one might be a better fit for you. Moving on to a stiff leg or an RDL, I'm just going to call them the same thing right now for convenience sake. So really the big difference with a stiff leg or an RDL type motion as opposed to a conventional deadlift is the knee is staying fixed. So whether it's technically a true stiff leg or maybe an RDL and has a slight bend, you know, for the training purposes doesn't make a massive difference. That's really the difference though, is all of the motion is going to be coming from the hip. So again, from a muscularity standpoint, what's the big difference going to be? Well, your hamstring, because it crosses your knee and that knee's being straighter and it crosses your hip as well too, your hamstring is going to hit a fully lengthened position before your glutes do. So it can be an exercise that's great to bias your hamstrings. Glutes are always still going to be involved. So anytime you're extending at the hip, it's definitely a joint effort between the glutes, the hamstrings, and even a little bit of adductors. But if you're looking to bias more hamstrings over glutes, then RDLs can be a great option. Josh is going to give a little demo here. So things same as with any deadlift. Once you get to the start position, you want your spine and back musculature locked in stone, so you don't want any spinal flexion or extension. You want to think all motion at the hips. A great cue here is hips back. And again, depending on whether or not you have a hard time managing your knees, like I'll just tell Josh, keep your knees locked, because wherever you set the knees, whether they're truly straight or with a slight bend, you just don't want them moving. And so obviously the other big difference between this and the conventional deadlift is your quads are pretty much not involved at all whatsoever. So with a conventional deadlift, even the sumo squat, there's a good degree of knee flexion extension involved. So quads are involved a lot. This is going to be purely a hip exercise. And again, if anything, it might bias your hamstrings a little bit more than your glutes. And same with every deadlift. All of your back musculature is still involved, but more in the secondary kind of stabilizing row, just keeping your spine from folding into that flex position. So last deadlift variation we're going to have here is a trap bar deadlift. So really the big difference here is you take away the fact that you have a bar limiting how far forward your shins can go. So basically, no matter who you are when you're deadlifting, your shins and knees at some point in time can't go through that bar that you're holding, especially with enough weight. So the big difference with a trap bar is it allows your knees and shins to go as far forward as you want. So basically it just makes it more knee dominant, meaning it's more quad dominant. So I always say a trap bar deadlift for most people is going to be somewhere between a conventional deadlift and a squat. So if you watch when Josh goes, you can basically see when he stops in that bottom position, his knee is much more far forward, his shin is farther forward. If he had a bar here, basically it'd be going right through his lower leg. So it's a position he's physically not capable of getting in with a conventional deadlift. And when he does it with a trap bar instead, it's going to be a lot more knee dominant, which is also going to be a lot more upright. So I really put this kind of in more of the category of it's a lower body exercise. Yes, your upper back is still involved to a certain degree stabilizing, but because your torso is in so much more of an upright position, that back musculature is not taking as much of the load. More knee dominant, more quad, and again, almost completely a lower body exercise as opposed to even involving that upper back more. Wrapping up all of the deadlift variations, one is not better than the other. As you can see, depending on the goal from a muscularity standpoint, from an aesthetic standpoint, just make sure you know what your goal is and pick your exercise accordingly. And again, from a strength standpoint, it's one of those things where, in my opinion, one is not definitively better than the other. The best advice I can give is to try them both for a pretty considerable period of time, because there's a skill component as well too when trying a new variation. And from there decide which one's going to be better to move more weight. Again, if that's your sport. If your goal is to be a power lifter or just to see how much weight you can lift, that's also a little bit of that exercise selection as well. So again, Josh Vogel here, Joe Bennett with Redcon1. Until next time.